Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Before we get started in today's video, don't forget to join our free Facebook community, get real answers to real credit questions, learn from some of the experts in our industry, as well as from other people that are in similar situations that are taking advantage of the free content, improving their credit and making their credit situation better. Hope to see you guys on the inside.
So now let's talk about the tri-bureau versus bureau-specific models that both Vantage and FICO have to deal with. So let's start off with FICO. Well, it creates bureau-specific scoring models. And what does that mean? Well, take for instance, FICO, as we've discussed in the past, is, very iteration-based. There's different versions of it going from FICO 1 all the way up to FICO 9. So let's take FICO 9, for instance. Well, it might have one name, but the model adapts and changes depending on the specific bureau it's reporting to. In other words, if you're basing your score on FICO 9, it might slightly differ to, say, a FICO 8 or even FICO 3 model that is being used by a separate bureau. And that's why a lot of times you'll look up your credit score, especially your FICO score, and notice across the 3 separate bureaus, it's different. So the Vantage scoring model, on the other hand, uses a tri-bureau specific model. So what does this mean? Well, essentially, they use and kind of compile your credit report from any of the 3 credit bureaus and formulate that into a single model. So your score with the Vantage score is going to generally be the same across the 3 major credit bureaus, making it a little bit more consistent when compared to the FICO scoring model. Diving on into more of the general differences between the scoring models is going to be how credit utilization and collection accounts are weighed. So kind of diving on into the credit utilization category, Vantage 4.0 will look back and really kind of consider trends in your credit utilization when it comes to calculating your score. And for example, it will take notes of making your payments in full, on time as well. While FICO and other, Vantage scoring models won't exactly take those trends into account when calculating your score. When it comes to how collection accounts work on both Vantage and FICO, well, they're going to kind of work similarly to one another. No matter what, a collection account is going to hurt your credit score for both a Vantage 3.0, 4.0, as well as FICO with any iteration. So when we say collections are very, very important aspects that you don't want to take lightly, we definitely mean it. You want to try to avoid those at all costs so you can maximize the credit score you have on your credit report. More aspects to consider when it comes to collection accounts, specifically with FICO, is how they differ per iteration. Now, I mentioned no matter what, they're generally going to affect your credit score, but the degree of affection is going to differ depending on the iteration you're using. So, going on into FICO 9, well, it does ignore paid collection accounts. This is super, super important. So if you pay off your collections even later, they will generally fall off your FICO 9 score. And it puts less of an importance on unpaid medical collections as well, and other types of collections. So that's a very important aspect to consider. But remember, FICO 9 is not going to be used by every single lender. They have the ability to really choose any type of credit score that they prefer. So it's very important to manage and keep up to date with how your scores are evolving and changing over time. Now, going on into FICO 8, it's going to be a little bit different because it really doesn't discern any difference between medical collection and non-medical collection accounts. So paid collections don't get ignored like they would normally with FICO 9. So if you are a person that tends to have a lot of collections on your account, just note that your FICO 9 score is probably going to be a lot higher than your FICO 8 score is. That is why you need to make sure that you check both of them. And if you can, check everything from FICO 1 up to 9 to really discern which credit score is best for you, as well as double checking with the type of loan or lender you're going to be trying to apply to that they are using the best scoring model for you as well. The other thing worth mentioning is both FICO 8 and 9 will only ignore collections if they are under $100. This is super important, especially if you're somebody who tends to have a lot of low balance collections. That is to note that they will not appear or affect your credit score at all. That isn't to say you shouldn't pay them off, because they will accrue interest over time and maybe even bump above that $100 limit. But if you're working within the 8 and 9 iterations of FICO, you may be working with a better credit score than you would with previous iterations. Diving on into some more collection differences, but this time with Vantage, both Vantage 3.0 and 4.0 will completely ignore paid collection accounts. This is very similar to how FICO 9 operates, and they give less weight to medical collections. So overall, so far, Vantage scores are going to be a lot better when it comes to, the consumer and how they operate with their credit scores. This means the Vantage scores are probably going to be a lot higher than they would be otherwise. But another thing to consider with Vantage is how they kind of judge collections in general, because not all collections are going to be completely ignored as well. Another thing to note is that if you have a once in a blue moon collection, say you generally make your payments on time, but this 1 month you forgot, well, they're going to put less of an emphasis on that one time you were late to paying. But if you're a frequent late payer, it's going to penalize you a lot more than it would with FICO. So those are both things to consider if you're either one of those types of people. Another difference to note between both Vantage and FICO scores are how hard inquiries are shown on your credit report. Both are going to use what is called Deduplication Logic, which essentially at a glance will take all of the loan applications you've applied for, as long as they're in the same type of loan, and combine them into one single hard inquiry check. Now, this is to note this doesn't work with credit cards, but this works with things like auto loans, mortgages, student loans as well, things like that, and essentially protects you, the consumer, and allows you to shop around for the best rates possible. Now, the major difference between both Vantage and FICO when it comes to deduplication logic is the amount of time you have between the applications. Now, you will have a certain amount of time for all of these to fall under one hard inquiry check, so it is important to note the date of your first application. So with Vantage Score, you're only going to have a 14-day window to be able to combine all of those different applications into one hard inquiry check, whereas with FICO, you're going to have a 45-day one. Now, just because you have 45 days with FICO doesn't necessarily mean that you should use all 45 of those days, because like I mentioned previously, you only have 14 with Vantage, and both of these scores are pulling from your credit report. So it's very important to consider the least common denominator here and focus and try to get all of your, kind of applications within that first 14-day window, so you can really try to maximize that deduplication logic window so you don't have a very different credit score when it comes to both your FICO and Vantage scores. Going back on into some of the differences between both FICO and Vantage, we're going to kind of come back to the scoring model. Now, you may remember that they both use that 300 to 850 score range. However, they kind of dictate each category within that range a little different. So let's start with FICO here, where they consider a exceptional or excellent credit score to be 800 to 850. Vantage, on the other hand, will consider a excellent credit score to be 781 to 850. Now, going on to the next category, being very good, FICO states it's 740 to 799, whereas Vantage will say it's 661 to 780. Good and or fair is going to be 670 to 739 for FICO, whereas Vantage is 601 to 660. Poor is going to be 580 to 669 for FICO, whereas Vantage is 500 to 600. And then poor is going to be 300 to 579 for FICO, whereas Vantage is 300 to 499. Now, as you can see, with a Vantage score, you may be able to get away with a little bit more when it comes to the types of loans you're applying for. This is because it is working in favor of you. So if you know that the loan or lender that you are trying to get an application with is using a Vantage score and you have kind of a lower credit score, it may be worth researching and figuring out if you can pre-apply to that. Because if you can get pre-approved, knowing that your Vantage score is a little bit better than your FICO, you could get away with, better rates, a better loan even, and things like that.